Welcome to the Invisible Wheelchair Podcast. The Invisible Wheelchair Podcast was selected by FeedSpot as one of the top 10 obsessive-compulsive disorder podcasts on the web. I'm Donald Grodoff, EFT tapping practitioner and OCD coach at FamilyOCD.com. On the Invisible Wheelchair Podcast, I focus on the hidden world of OCD and anxiety with interviews and information around this topic. My purpose is to bring about awareness of OCD, those who treat OCD, and of course, those who suffer with OCD. Obsessive-compulsive disorder is a treatable and manageable disorder. In my practice at FamilyOCD.com, I guide people through the process of ERP therapy and other alternative treatments. If you know of someone suffering with OCD, I can help. Simply visit FamilyOCD.com. If you or someone you know suffers or has suffered and recovered from OCD and would like to get their story out, simply contact us through www.invisiblewheelchair.com. We want to talk to you and get your story out on the podcast. Know that the ideas and thoughts presented here are not necessarily those of Family OCD, Invisible Wheelchair Podcast, or Donald Grodoff. We also ask you to take just a few moments and leave comments at www.invisiblewheelchair.com. Those comments help us to know what the next topic should be, and we really want to hear from you. Now, let's get to that podcast. With great joy in today's podcast, I introduce you to a friend and colleague of mine, Jondi Whitis. I have known Jondi for quite a few years, and I so much admire her for her energy, her skills, and her passion for what she does and who she is. And today we're specifically going to be talking about her new book, Compassion in Action, Emotional First Aid for Children, How to Quickly Help in Times of Trouble. Let me tell you a little bit about Jondi. She is a well-known master trainer of trainers for the original nonprofit Global EFT Association, EFT International. Based in New York, she travels widely to share her expertise and contagious enthusiasm for emotional first aid, energy psychology, and EFT tapping. Jondi's favorite work is helping children experience the world with less fear and suffering. She teaches them about the human design and how to use it to better weather whatever life throws at them. She firmly believes we are all stewards of the world's children and that everyone can help our young ones better survive and more quickly recover after a sudden adverse situation, even if they're from the past. She has expanded her trainings to include and emphasize the importance of emotional first aid, the first step in preventing and recovering from everyday traumatic experiences that not only define our times, but can forever define children's meaning about themselves and the world. These lessons are combined with those of her co-author, Dr. Deborah Miller, into an online course and their new book, Compassion in Action, Emotional First Aid for Children, How to Quickly Help in Times of Trouble, for those who feel the call to create even deeper understanding for helping our world's children to survive. As the former lead trainer for the Newtown Community Trauma Relief Project, Jondi learned how difficult it can be to manage our own distress through crises that literally affect everyone in the community. This created a profound desire to help more children and their caregivers in this era of difficult, frequent, and distressing challenges. With this book's release, Jondi renews her intention to provide what she's learned to all who have, work with, and care for children, so they will have the information, tools, and confidence to teach easily learned and applied methods for rapid regulation, reset, and recovery. Jondi welcomes invitations to speak on these issues and conduct customized trainings for a variety of issues and interests. So join me now for my interview with Jondi. Well, Jondi, thank you so much for being part of the Invisible Wheelchair podcast. I've been looking forward to this. Known you a long time, and it's such a wonder to get your wisdom imparted to us today. Is just it lights me up. So thank you again for being part of this.
Well, thank you. And as we've spoken together before, I stand on the shoulders of all my mentors, and the price for that is pay it back.
Well, I'm glad you do. So I wanted to ask you, if you could, for my audience, to give them a little bit like the Cliff Note version or the synopsis of the book, what it's about, and then what inspired you to write this book, to put this out there.
Sure. The book that I wrote, which is this one, Compassion in Action, that's the title, and the subtitle is Emotional First Aid for Children. And it is a field guide. It's a reference book, and it's really simply written so everyone, I think, can benefit. It's not written for children. It's written for those who have children, work with children, care about children. 2 years ago, when I started writing this with Deborah Miller, she's an American PhD that lives in Oaxaca, Mexico, and she has been working with pediatric oncology families for a very long time and is a colleague. When we started writing this 2 years ago, we wrote it because we noticed that every week there was a new disaster that children, the most vulnerable of any society, were having to somehow manage and survive. And we thought, well, we could be helpful just taking the years of everything we know and then translating it into a way that tall people could help small people to better navigate what we call troubling times, because some people are actually even allergic to the idea of the word trauma. So we don't have to go there and trigger them or make it bigger or more dramatic than it needs to be. Troubling times are different for every kind of person. And so we wanted to speak to that. So whether they're man-made, and that's actually what was driving some of our thoughts, is every week here in the United States, we were having another shooting, another episode, another tragedy that we would say for 48-hour news cycle, tragedy. And then it would go on. And we also had, because of climate change, we also had a new natural disaster at least every month. This flood, this hurricane, this tornado, this water rising, this fire, this. And we thought, oh my goodness, we need to do something in the world larger than just our voice, because we are where we are. I'm in New York, she's in Oaxaca. Maybe you know us, maybe you don't, but we need to get that information out there. And that's what drove us 2 years ago to write this book.
Well, that's wonderful. And I have to say, my audience, this podcast is about OCD and the anxiety around, because OCD is an anxiety disorder. Mm-hmm. And this book to me is a go-to book. It's one that's a guide that's going to have a lot of, what do you call it, the bent ears, curled ears, because what I've realized, and I want to bring this out, when I read the book, initially I looked at it and said, well, it really doesn't talk about OCD. It doesn't talk about that kind of disorder. But then as I read through it, I realized how much it really does fit for people that are suffering with OCD, for those caregivers, because that's who you're going with. That's who I work with. I really work a lot with the parents. And what I realized, there's a couple of things about it, especially that I realized that fits so well to OCD. One is the emergency factor that you talk about, because these traumas. And when somebody triggers an OCD, basically, like our house would go in lockdown, basically, and it would be an emergent. Everybody would go into emergency mode in a way, because the trauma for everybody else, besides the sufferer of OCD, was dramatic. And they had to, my son used to tell me he would close his door, turn his headphones on, just so he didn't have to listen. Plus, it really does work also for the OCD person too. And then the
Yes.
self-help part of it, one of the big things I learned in OCD was that we had to take care of, as parents, we had to take care of ourselves
Yes.
almost first. It's kind of like putting that mask on first, like they say in the airplane. And I also feel like it fits the OCD person too, because when they are in a calmer place, using some of these techniques can help for when they do go into those anxiety places,
Mhm.
those traumatic triggers that happen. We used to, when my daughter was calm and she was kind of here with us, we would use techniques that would help us in the future, like the tapping that I do, that I'm an EFT
Yes.
practitioner just like yourself.
Mhm.
And then the other thing about it was I love when you use the compassionate part, because when I work with people with OCD, I talk to the parents about I need one of the parents to be a compassionate coach that doesn't come at this in a military sense, of
Mhm.
authoritarian kind of sense. They come at it
Right.
with compassion, knowing that the person within that OCD person is their child, the person they love, they care about. And even though they're raging or they're in this zombie
Mhm.
state, like my daughter
Mhm.
sometimes would get, it was still my loving daughter. So I had to learn compassion in how I handled that. So, and then lastly, the techniques you give in this thing, the appendix gives so many neat natural techniques to be able to handle anxiety that would be wonderful for a friend. So I thank you for this book because I think it fits very well for what my audience and for myself and what I do. So again, I thank you for that.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you detail it out so well because that gives me a lot of encouragement that I'm on the right track, that I'm actually being helpful, that these people are going to benefit. And that means, of course, the children of the world.
Yeah. I heard you recently on a podcast with Gene Montrestelli,
Mhm.
and one of the things that really caught me, you described your approach with kids, and I think you were really going through your whole process with them. But I especially liked your approach, and I'd like to, because I think you call it verbal first aid, is what I understand it from the book. I'd
Sure.
like you to talk a little bit about that because I thought that was amazing, and it really helped me. I learned off of it, and it's going to
Oh,
help
good.
me in how I work. So if you could talk a little bit
Sure.
about that. That would be great.
I'm just going to pull us back just a moment in
Okay.
that you hit the nail on the head. It's us first. It's always us first. In the way that some of us were raised, myself included, that felt selfish, wrong. We didn't do that. It was always
Yeah.
other directed.
Yeah.
But just like an ATM that you keep hitting all day long, at some point you're going to be out, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And therefore you cannot serve. You can't keep giving out. So like the airplane, absolutely, the idea is I have to do me first in order to be the me that's going to be helpful to you. And another thing that we'll say is emotional first aid is what I call lots of my courses and this book. It's a field of work. It's not a brand name, not trying to own that market and sell it. I'm trying to sell the idea of training
Hmm.
ourselves to know it and how to use it in our life for great effect. The same is true with verbal first aid. It is a field of endeavor. It is a type of thing that we're doing. That said, I'll just go over to the fact that I had to learn, just like you had to learn, Don, that if I am so upset and if I am using my mouth as an anxiety release, blah, 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 that's not helping them.
Hmm.
It is jacking them up,
We
right?
climb the wall together, I always call it.
Beautiful. Like the way you said that. I also say that all those words are landing on you like silicone. It's just they cannot take in that deluge when they are jacked up themselves. And there's fancier words for this like threat response reactions and stuff like that. But I'm really focused on making this the people's tool, the children's tool. So I'm going to continue to speak in a very everyday way most of the time to be accessible. So if I wanted to talk to you, Dawn, and I could see you were upset, I am training myself to come at this with more breath, slower pace, less words to help. That's the intention, not to manipulate, but to meet you where you are with what you need in that moment. And a jacked response tells me, as the original EFT master Ann Adams used to say, too much, too fast. Right?
I like that. Yeah.
I mean, it's beautiful. I always remember that because that means that even if I'm prepared to give it, that doesn't mean they can receive it. And for those of you like me who are Gary Craig advocates who he changed our lives with this EFT tapping work, he said, meet them where they are. For those of you that are therapists, my hero Carl Rogers said, it's not about you, it's about bringing this presence and meeting them, giving them what they need and creating that safe space for them, right? Gabor Mate, another one who says that, compassion, compassionate presence, compassionate witness, right? And so I love and adore tapping. This is what I do all the time. But this case, we're talking about emotional first aid, which is different than EFT tapping, right? EFT is always tapping, but not all tapping is EFT. It's very specific. And what we're doing now is we're going out past EFT, looking at other things. And I would call emotional first aid a precursor to tapping, meaning before I get the words, and also an interventionary kind of tapping. And so, just like you said, if I'm using verbal first aid, I'm slowing down. I'm really focused on meeting you where you are. I'm going to adjust myself. And by the way, this is just practice, right? It's just like a fireman. The reason they get on the truck with all their belongings is because they've practiced laying them out in precise order so that even when the alarm bell rings at 3 a.m. and they're grogged, they have everything there and it promotes success. This is not different.
You have three kind of sections to the book. First is how to help yourself, which is what we talked about. Second is how to help the child. And then you have the third part about teach others to help the children. So I was kind of curious as being a guide as to why that wasn't a separate piece and why you put the teach part into the book. Was there a
Well,
specific reason
that's
for
a
that? Or?
great question. Yes, yes, it was so deliberate. The first thing we just talked about, it has to start with you, no matter what. It just has to start with you. The second thing was essentially the title of our book, right? It's Emotional First Aid for Children and how to teach them that, right? Or pass it on if you don't want to fancy yourself as a teacher. How do you model it and give it to them? But the third part was about our mission, which is to reach over 1 million kids by the end of the year. And that means once I learn it and once I pass it on to my kids, now I'm going to teach other caregivers, parents, teachers, pediatrics, emergency services, child service agencies, child care agencies. Now I want to teach them what I know. And keeping it at that people's tool level allows me to do that. I don't have to have a shingle or alphabet soup behind my name to be a helpful force in the universe, teaching others how we can help our children better navigate troubling times. And so to do that, you don't have to be a genius teacher or facilitator. We try to make it so easy and intuitive for you that you will want to do that and you'll join us.
Cool. When you have a child that you're working with and they're having issues, can you like step through exactly what you do? You talked about like when you approach the child and how you talk to them and what you say and then how you lead it through to what you want to do. I like I said, I love that process and I'd like it to go a little deeper into that if you could.
Well, help me remember what you liked the best about Gene's interview with him as I go. I don't want to miss anything that you wanted to pass on.
Oh, I remember, I mean, you literally stepped through saying, I see a child, because I like, one of the things you talked about was instead of telling them what to do, you said, what really worked for me when I was in that kind of place,
Absolutely.
how about we try this? Because this really helped me, kind of thing. So maybe start there, and then how would you
Sure.
lead from there?
Well, and I learned this from Ann Adams too, so I'm always trying to attribute correctly. But Ann was for years the chief administrator at a state-run home for children with severe emotional challenges. And so she saw children in their, let's call it, worst, most helpless state, often, every day. And so what she learned was she had to approach them without agenda except to help. The only thing I'm doing is preparing myself as an active vessel, right? And that can easily mean grounded or neutral or calm, whatever words work for you. But I have to be in my best neutral, non-agenda state. And that is about the practice we talked about. Let's assume you know how to do that now because you've been practicing it. And I don't mean perfect. So after we are in our state of readiness, that means I can easily approach this person. The next thing is about noticing. We want to notice what's going on with that kid. And we may not prefrontal cortex type of analyze this yet. It's more along the ideas of Dr. Stephen Porges' neuroception. I feel a disturbance in the force. I feel that there is something going on with that child. I've noticed something out of the corner of my eye, right? This is when I turn my neutral self over and I can approach that person, if possible, physically, if not, by cutting through the room with my eyes, with my voice, and I might say, hey, I'm noticing something doesn't sit quite right with you. May I help? Or, hi, I see something's going on. I'd love to help. Do you see how we're answering your question about verbal first aid? Short, directive pieces, just enough to get their attention and to help them process all that's going on by giving them doable, accessible, short phrases. I might invite them. I'm not going to teach them how to do EFT. I might invite them to do a little intervention or strategy that helps me, and that is how I'm going to approach it with them. I can say, hey, Dawn, I don't know what's going on, but I do this when I feel the way that I see your face right now. Look. And I feel that a lot. And that's why I do this. And it just helps me. And if you try it, it might help you too. Now, that was a 3 run-on sentence. So I'm going to coach myself in my performance. I'm going to say, hey, Jondi, slow that down. Say, hey, everything all right? I see something's going on. I do this when I feel like that. Try it. That might help you too. So do you see I'm actively putting in the pauses and the breath for both of us? Because otherwise, in our rush to help, and I think this is what attracted you in that conversation with Jean, in my rush to help, I'm like, hey, I see something's going on over there and I don't know what's going on, but you really need to sit down now and we'll talk about it. Do you have something to you want to tell me anything that's going on here? It seems to me like you're really upset about something. I don't know. Everybody shut up. I can't even hear Dawn.
Yeah.
Right? And that just continues to jack it up.
Yeah.
So what we're training ourselves to do is be that first responder that's going to be capable and helpful in whatever tiny way they can allow you in that moment.
Oh, that's good. Now, do you find that there are times, this is stuff I think I've read or heard in different workshops, but are there times when you meet them at the same level?
Well, there is that thought that if you are mimicking, that you are being disrespectful, but if you are mirroring, that you are trying to get on the same wavelength as them. Now that's a fine discernment for a lot of people. So I'm just going to pull it apart and say, I know where it comes from in my psychology studies and courses, but I'm not sure that it's easy for most people to do that without mimicking or being misunderstood.
Yeah, coming
Right?
across wrong.
So let me just transfer that back to our verbal first aid. If you are a white-coated medical professional in the waiting room and you're talking to me, I'm probably going to try to mirror your demeanor and your language as best I can so that you can see I'm prepared to meet you where you are. But if you're an 8-year-old at the fair who is lost and panicky, I don't want to look lost and panicky as a mirrored response. That
Yeah.
makes no sense. But I
Yeah.
would like to arrange myself, I'm using those words carefully. I like to arrange myself to meet you where you are in small, vulnerable, upset person by just compassionately sending you a big jolt from my heart of, hey, you look lost. I would help, right?
Yeah.
Just I'm changing what we call the prosody of my voice, all these fancy words for stuff. But the truth is, I'm just trying to meet you where you are in a way that I hope you can accept.
No, that's great. That is wonderful. That, like I said, I think I've learned off of that myself. I mean, I know when I talk about surrogate tapping, which you and I both know, I always talk about that you have to be, I always called it my neutral loving place.
Ooh,
Um,
nice.
but I never thought about it, I guess, in approaching for an anxiety place. And this makes me now think about that now, not just for circuit tapping, but for any approach is to be able to come to a neutral place myself.
Hmm.
Like I say, neutral place, neutral, loving, compassionate place myself to be able to just meet them where they are. That's wonderful. I think that is great.
And can I say something specially for your crowd? You you know from the look or the even just the energy behind you, you know when your child is in that place.
Mm-hmm.
There are not a lot of words that are needed. I can look at you and nod. I can turn my face towards you and go, that place. Okay, let's do this. Right?
Yeah.
Nobody needs to say more. It's like tapping in that, the reason we use words in tapping is to target and focus. That's all. So
Mm-hmm.
that we can tune in. If someone's already upset, believe me, they're already tuned in. We don't need the words, and we also don't need a measurement, which is classic and wonderful in EFT. But in that moment, do I really need to ask them to measure what is clearly
Yeah.
off the charts?
Yeah.
Right. It's
Yeah.
about compassion. Here we are again. Meet them where they are with compassion.
What I
Beautiful.
wanted to ask you is if you can share with my audience, um, one, how they can find the book, and
Mhm.
two, how they might be able to, if they wanted to get more information about you and find out about you, what would be their best ways to find that information?
Oh, great. Well, I would be delighted. So my name, which is fairly odd, I'll give you that, is Jondi, Jondi. My last name is even worse, Whitis, which is Whitis. So I have a website cleverly and creatively named jondiwhitis.com. You can reach me at this email too, Jondi, Jondi, at EFT, we all know that, the number 4, and the word that we're all looking for, results. Jondi at EFT4results.com. That's my direct email. You can find my book, Compassion in Action, Emotional First Aid for Children, and the third subtitle is How to Quickly Help in Times of Trouble. That's what it's for. And it's on Amazon, and you can get it through a paperback copy, which is for our field guide. It's a handy small size for your hand or your backpack or your briefcase. And you can also get it in a Kindle version if you want for your phone. So it's always there. I will tell you that there are other reference books on EFT if you're interested, also on Amazon on the same page. If you forget all this, you can type my name into Amazon and you'll still find it. I would like to remind you that it is in 3 sections because the most important thing is to help yourself first become this agent of change and compassion for someone else. I will tell you that in this field guide, it is not a Bible, it is a field guide, and we will have a much longer online course for it by the end of the year. But this is what you need to know now. It's divided into some handy pieces of what to do when charts that you can easily take out of your book or PDF and laminate and put on a little ring right by your desk, in your car, any place you need to be. And that there's a couple of facts I'm just going to leave you with, please,
Sure.
if you don't mind. So remember, always move towards safety. And that means physical and mental, and of course, what we've been talking about, which is emotional. Use simple facts, not judgment. There's no time for that in this particular phase. Planning is not being paranoid, and it's not inviting disaster, and it is not attracting. It is preparing for success, and if not for you, for them. Please connect with others of like-mindedness. Don't isolate, because that's the way we get misinformed and stuck in our own fear and doubts. So please connect with others. Give yourself time, and give that person you're trying to help time to integrate and process. Don't go so quickly. One thing at a time is going to be pleasing and soothing and ultimately more helpful. It takes time. Recovery is a very individual experience. So, with compassion and respect, honor that child before you and do the best you can, trusting that it's always going to be better when you do. That said, I hope you'll join me in making sure that you get this book out, if you like it, to everybody that has contact with children. You'll join our mission of contacting 1 million children before the end of the year. And I would say this is a perfect addition and gift that you can give your family members as a parent's gift, as a PTA gift, as a school gift, as a pediatric hospital, child care centers, pediatric specialists, emergency services that deal with children all the time. This is how we can all do better than this. And this is Jondi, and I like to call myself the people's teacher, and I like to make sure you're going to be one too. So thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you, Jondi. I really appreciate you being on the podcast today. And like I said, we'll be getting this out, get people to understand and know about it. This concludes this podcast. We really would appreciate your comments. Simply leave a comment at www.invisiblewheelchair.com. There, you're able to submit a comment that will help us determine future podcasts. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest on the podcast, please email don@invisiblewheelchair.com. Remember, there is a corresponding tapping recording for each of the podcasts, with the exception of the interview podcast. You can find these tapping recordings and archived past podcasts at www.invisiblewheelchair.com. Finally, there is relief for OCD, and we at FamilyOCD.com and FocusedHealthyFamily.com can help you find that relief. Again, you can contact us through those sites, FamilyOCD.com or FocusedHealthyFamily.com. You can also find us on Facebook at Invisible Wheelchair Podcast. You can find us on Twitter at InvisibleWheel1, that's the number 1, or at FamilyOCD. So thank you for listening. Keep tapping and transcending your life to new heights.